Well, hello all. I'm so looking forward to today. It's going to rain. It's the coldest day of winter so far, and I'm going to make a fire inside this tent. We're not going to set it on fire, and I'm going to cook a spaghetti bolognese. I'm going to take this Dakota fire hole. I'm going to be cooking on that, but then I'm going to move the tent over it. Just have a look. That's what the tent looks like on the sides. And on the other side, looks like that. And it comes to a top here, and then it slants downwards. So it's a triangular teepee-shaped plastic tent. And then I'm just going to drag this tent over the Dakota fire hole and cook inside it. Once the fire's going, this tent over the fire hole, as you can see there. Then I'm going to close this up and be nice and snug. It's going to be raining cats and dogs, and I'm going to be able to cook. So the idea is to be able to cook in the tent, in my Dakota fire hole, with a pot on top, without setting the place on fire. Man, am I looking forward to that. Well, just look why we don't want to start the fire inside the tent, but only later on do we want to have the fire in the tent. Because it's going so strong. I'm thinking of putting this log on, but I'm just doubt that it's necessary. Well, let's have some wine. Lovely. We've got our pot, a lid. We're going to put some oil in. And then we're going to put the mince in. Then we're going to peel some onions, put them in. Onions. We're going to put some spaghetti, some beans, a But I don't want the liquid of these black beans. I'm going to put some baked beans, a couple of stock cubes, some spaghetti, and some boiling water. We have our flask here. Let's just see if we can give the stick here. We can do something about that. Maybe we can put it through the air hole. Because it's a bit too long. There's our spaghetti bolognese in the making. More water, the last bit of water. Making sure that it's level. And I'm putting this plate onto the top as a lid. Now at this point I feel it's safe enough to bring the tent over this fire. So I'm taking everything out. I'm going to drag so now we have a fire in a tent. I'm just going to pull the sides out. So now our fire is in the tent. Wow. Is it warm? Maybe a bit smoky, but is it only warm? It is so toasty warming yet. So now we have our fire in this tent. And if it wasn't for this little log sticking out the air hole, which will burn down, I think it would be reasonably unsmoky. Yeah. Well, while we waiting for that to cook and while it's about to rain, so I'm very glad we got this fire going. And boy, is it toasty warm in here. It's almost like a sauna. So it's a little bit smoky, actually almost not smoky, just a touch smoky, which I guess one would expect having a fire in a tent. It is so warm. I'm keeping this, and as I say, this is our coldest day of winter so far, but wow, is this only snug. And I'm just going to let that cook till it's done. So while we're waiting, I'm just going to ask you, do you believe that God knows the future? Do you believe God knows all things, and all things includes the future? Well, there is a scripture somewhere, there are many scriptures that say that God knows all things. But did you know that there's also a scripture in 1 John 2 verse 20 which says, you have an unction from the Holy One and you know all things. So you also know all things. By the very same language that says that God knows all things, it says that you know all things. So I presume if God knows all things and God knows the future, then you know all things, you know the future. By that very same logic. That if we know all things, we must know the future. And I'll tell you why this idea of predestination, that God knows everything, that everything's worked out right down to the finest detail, in a sense, we're all just part of one movie, there's only one script. God knows that script, we're all part of that script, we're actors in that script, we're puppets in that script. There can be no change from that script. That script is your destiny. God can think through that script and he knows the end from the beginning. He knows exactly how that movie is going to end, how every single actor in that movie is going to turn out. Now that idea gives a lot of people joy. They think, yeah, everything's worked out, God, there's nothing that's going to come up in the future that God hasn't foreseen, and therefore he's given me the strength to cope with everything that's in the future. He's already given me that strength. It's predestined. But think about it. You don't know the future. And I'm saying to you, and some people are going to say, this sounds heretical. And I say, God doesn't know the future. God only knows the future in as much as if he says, I want this to happen, he's got the power to make it happen. But does God care about every little detail of the future? Every single person that's ever going to live? Does he know the exact choice? Does God know that I'm going to decide to have a drink now? Oh, no, I'm just going to exercise my free will. I'm not going to have a drink. Did God know that right from the beginning of time? that I decided not to have a drink then, just to spite myself. And I say no. I say that God has the power to make anything he wants come to pass. But as for knowing the future, this is the way I see it. It's like a video game. You interact, God interacts. Depending on what God does, you do something. If you do something, God does something. And I say to you why I say that. Let's take, for example, King Saul. God chose the best king, but did God know that Saul would fail, or did it come as a surprise to him that they would fail? It says God repented that he'd made Saul king. It's like God was disappointed. He was surprised. He was. It wasn't like God knew that Saul was going to be a failure from the start. Saul had a part to play, and Saul didn't play his part, and therefore the thing began to fail. Saul failed. Or what about the Israelites when he promised them that he'd take them out of Egypt to the promised land? Was God lying when he knew that they would fail? So he was made a false promise that he would take them to the promised land. Or was it that yes, he said, I'll take you to the promised land, but then they failed on their part, and then God was disappointed, and so he said, okay, you guys are not going into the promised land, your children can go into the promised land. So that means that if God promises that something's going to happen and doesn't happen, then it means that God's a liar. He knows that it won't happen, but he said, okay, but I'm going to take you out of Egypt to the promised land. You see the problem there. Or let's take as another case. God tells Abram to sacrifice his son Isaac. God doesn't know whether Abram's going to have that much faith that he would actually go ahead and sacrifice his very own son, his beloved son. And when he's about to strike with a knife, he sees and he says, now I know that you will obey me. Now I know. It sounds like God didn't entirely know what Abraham would do until he raised the knife and had the resolve to slay Isaac. And at that point, God knew. You see, if it says that God repents himself of something, let's take the flood. God made man. He made man to live 1,000 years before the flood. But then the world was full of violence, and now it said that the Lord repented him that he put man on earth. But is God just play acting? If he knew everything, it wouldn't repent him. It wouldn't disappoint him. If he'd known beforehand, the people pre-flood are going to be a failure, so then God acts all surprised and repents himself, and then he comes up and decides to wipe them all out with a flood. No. I believe that God gave the people pre-flood a 1,000-year lifespan. He gave them everything they needed to succeed. They failed him. They disappointed him. Only a few people like Noah and Enoch and Abel were sufficiently in love with God to do God's will. So God found that pre-flood, giving them 1,000 years to live, and whatever that system was pre-flood, it just didn't work. So God wiped them all out, started again, seemed to at that stage limit their lifespan, but also limit the angels in their interactions with people, because it says before the flood that the sons of God took the daughters of men. It sounded almost like the angels were interacting with women. That's what it sounds like. That looks like it's cooking beautifully. It's a little smoky in here. This is the first time I'm trying this with a fire in the tent. It's warm as crazy, but it's just a little bit smoky. I'm just wondering if we cover that. And it's hot enough to boil. So it seems to be working well. So then God tries Israel, and he tries the old covenant. And guess what? God finds that the results, the fruits of the old covenant are not good. He produces basically a group of Pharisees. And the nation of Israel disappoints him. So God decides, no, I need a new covenant. So then God doesn't do away with the Jews and the Israelites as his favorite people. He just says, no, I'm going to open this to the world. If the Israelites reject me, let's see, I'll open it to the world and see what they say. And the world, that's why Jesus came, to open up the promises and the blessings and the law and everything that was spoken about and offered to Israel. He came and offered it to the Gentiles. They loved it, they wanted it, they accepted it. But here we are today. So I say God acts in real time. Just imagine, Einstein used to say God doesn't play dice. But God, we live in a world that's got quantum physics where things seem to happen even, you could say randomly. Okay, you could say maybe God knows where every atom is going to be at every second, nanosecond. But the world, the atomic world, seems to obey quantum physics, whereby things can't be nailed down. And I say, just think about it. If you've got billions and billions of people all making decisions, and if they have real choice, which is very important to God, if I make a choice, it's going to affect another person. That's going to affect their choice, and it's going to have this ripple effect. Every choice of every person is going to have a ripple effect on every other person that they come into contact with. And are you saying that God has thought through every single little action that every single person is going to make? And God is basically just playing this all in his mind, and they have no choice but to make that, and he knows already what choice they're going to make before the time. To me, that just sounds, the probabilities, as you ripple out from two people making random choices, it begins to ripple out, and it spawns so many infinite possibilities. And you say, oh, well, God can keep track of all these infinite, but God doesn't have to. If he has the power to make something happen, let's say God says, I'm going to send my son, he's going to establish a kingdom, he's got the power to make that kingdom come to pass. Whether one person's going to succeed or not, and just think about it, God says, don't let someone take your crown. So that seems to say that God has a crown for you. But it is possible that somebody else can take your crown. So how would that be possible in this world where that's predestined? If a crown is set for you, how can somebody else come and take that crown that was predestined for you? If there isn't a chance that you could lose your crown. And I say that the world is open. You interact. It is up to us, as God says, we must work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. And it is possible, as Paul said, that one can become shipwrecked in faith if one neglects one's calling. Now, the predestination crowd would say, well, that was just predestined to happen. But I say that we participate with God, and I just love the way it works when it's not. This predestination, it's such nonsense in my mind. It's almost fatalistic. I love the fact that we interact with God. If I've got a problem, I go to God and I say, God, this is my problem. And I beg God. And God says, I hear you, my son, I love you. I'm going to heal you. I'm going to help you. I'm going to empower you. I'm going to do whatever it takes for you to, etc., etc. So just think about it. Blessing us and interacting with us, and this is all happening in real time, and the future is being determined as we play the game. Can you imagine how boring it would be for God if he knew everything that's ever going to happen? He could just fast forward it through his mind. Be like, there's only one tape, and God could just fast forward it to the end. What's the point? No, but God is excited playing this game of faith with us. We interact, he interacts, we interact, he interacts. There's millions of his children all interacting like in real time. And as I say, there's nothing in the Bible that says that God knows the future. God does predestine some people like John and Jeremiah and Moses and David, and yeah, there are certain people that God has called with specific purposes in mind, even and God empowers them to fulfill these purposes. So there are certain people that were called from the womb, as it says, to perform a certain task. That is totally and absolutely true, and God's power enables that and allows that. Yeah, I must say that having tried this once, of having a fire in a tent, I know the Indians and others used to have these teepees with a fire in the center, but I'm sure it must have been as smoky as this, having your fire, no chimney, open fire. Yeah, I must say that I'm going to, I think, move my tent back because this is just too smoky. Well, it may seem obvious in retrospect that if you have a fire in a tent, that it's going to be smoky, but I didn't expect it to be as smoky as that. This is so much better and more pleasant. I would say if it gets cold, possibly have your fire just at the entrance to the tent and make sure that the wind direction is away from the tent, etc. Have it just outside the tent, but having it in the tent, whoa. I mean, I didn't burn down the tent, but I must say it sure was smoky. Now it's a lot better. Beautiful again. And everything's bubbling away. Just look how nice the food looks. Well, I think it's nearly done. All we have to do is add some gravy powder and some tomato sauce. To this. Yep, looks beautiful. That'll thicken it up. I actually meant to bring something to dish with, but I forgot. Oh well, I'm sure we'll manage. We've got some cheese. See if we can get some of the spaghetti on. Yum, yum. So, there she is. That looks pretty good. The cheese will melt in a moment. some people might say, but the meat looks a little bit the wrong color. Oh, the joys of being colorblind. I don't know color. I don't mind gray meat, so long as it's cooked, which the spaghetti is done. It all looks fantastic, and it's smoke free. That is delicious. Delicious. Spaghetti's beautifully done. Meat's cooked. Now, like I say, it caught me by surprise how smoky it was having the fire in the tent, but you know, I'm sure some of you would have thought that through. It came as a bit of a surprise to me. I actually didn't realize quite how smoky the fire would be. I'm just looking now, I just see steam, very little smoke. But I think in a small confined tent, all the smoke is going to just hang around in the air. So you can't really have a fire in the tent with you unless you got a chimney. You can have it like this, beautiful outside. Having the fire outside and maybe have a reflector. But yeah, I'm sure many of you are smarter than me and can think things through. I like to experiment. I love this tent structure, this teepee shaped tent. It's fantastic for keeping the rain out. It's just a matter of how do you stay warm in the middle of winter. I would say probably on heater rock and wrap that up in material and bring it into your tent and use it as a hot water bottle. Maybe a better, less smoky idea.